today's episode, Anews editor Mustafa Kocakanar and political analyst Javed Rana will join me to discuss the recent diplomatic developments from Turkey. And we'll also take an in-depth look at the Israeli genocide in Gaza, where the death toll has crossed 54,000.
Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan hosted Syria's interim president Ahmed al-Shara in Istanbul on Saturday. The talks come as part of Turkey's growing role in supporting Syria's post-conflict reconstruction and regional reintegration. The meeting focused on political transition efforts, economic cooperation, and the future of Syrian-Turkish relations in the new era. President Erdoğan reaffirmed Turkey's support for Syria's sovereignty, unity, and the formation of an inclusive central government representing all ethnic and religious groups. He also emphasized that Ankara would not allow any entity affiliated with terrorist organizations to gain political or military legitimacy in Syria. Both leaders discussed joint efforts to rebuild infrastructure, strengthen border security, and boost humanitarian aid. Al-Shara praised Turkey's role in supporting Syria's transition and welcomed cooperation grounded in mutual respect and shared regional interests. The Istanbul summit is expected to accelerate Syria's international reintegration efforts, with Ankara also advocating for the easing of global sanctions that continue to hamper the country's recovery.
Welcome back to the program. Anews editor Mustafa Kocakanar, welcome to the program.
Good morning, Omar.
Mustafa, let's start with the latest meeting between Syrian President Ahmed al-Shara and Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan. They met on Saturday. There were some important things to discuss. There was regional security, more avenues for extended cooperation, and most importantly, strengthening diplomatic ties. What went on during this meeting, Mustafa, on Saturday?
Omar, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan hosted Syria's new interim president Ahmed al-Shara in Istanbul on Saturday, and Turkish and Syrian decision makers discussed all aspects of bilateral relationships between two important neighbors in the Middle East, as well as exchanging views on the latest geopolitical developments in the region. And we know that Turkey is one of the most important countries, reiterating its strong support for Syria's territorial integrity and political sovereignty. Within this context, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan reaffirmed Turkey's unwavering support for Syria's political stability and economic prosperity. As you know, last week, both the United States and the European Union decided to lift sanctions on Syria because during the civil war years in Syria, Western countries imposed sanctions on the Assad regime in Syria. And as you know, the geopolitical landscape totally changed in Syria in December as the opposition forces led by Ahmed al-Shara took control of the country, and country's longtime ruler Bashar al-Assad fled to Russia. And since the very beginning of the new era in Syria, Turkey is taking steps to normalize its relationships with Syria, and Turkey is always trying to increase international awareness about the political situation in the country. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan held phone conversation with several international stakeholders to convince them to lift sanctions on Syria. And U.S. President Donald Trump and European Union have recently taken steps to lift sanctions on Syria, and it will, I think, help Syria rebuild and reconstruct the war-torn country. Syria's leader Ahmed al-Shara also praised Turkey's diplomatic efforts in terms of increasing international awareness about the political situation in the country. And Erdoğan and Shara also pledged to strengthen bilateral cooperation between Turkey and Syria in all areas, ranging from politics and economy to military and trade. I think that in the coming future we will see further cooperation between Turkey and Syria in terms of dealing with the shared security challenges in the region.
Musa, when we're talking about Syria's reconstruction and redevelopment, we need to understand that Syrian refugees are still in Turkey. They definitely discussed this issue as well. So now, when we're talking about reconstruction, the refugees must return to Syria as well. But Turkish President Erdoğan has said that they're only going to return to Syria when the security situation is balanced and they know that they're going to be safe in Syria when they return. So what's the latest development regarding the transfer of refugees from Turkey to Syria?
Omar, according to official numbers, Turkey is currently hosting more than 3 million Syrians in the country. As you know, Turkey opened its door to Syrian people fleeing Bashar al-Assad atrocities during the civil war years. As a geopolitical landscape change in Syria, right now everyone expects the return of Syrians to their homeland. But Turkey is always reiterating that the return of Syrians should be dignified and voluntarily. Within this context, Turkey is trying to expand new rulers in Syria to normalize the political situation in the war-torn country. And right now, Syria desperately needs international help to reconstruct and rebuild the country. Within this context, Turkey is always taking steps to ensure the long-standing peace and stability in Syria, because Turkey and Turkish decision makers reiterate at every opportunity that yes, Syrians will go to their homeland, but they desire economic prosperity and political stability in the country. I think in the coming future, Turkey and Syria will continue to take steps to discuss what can be done in terms of returning of people to Syria. I think if Syrians want to return to their homeland, they want to see long-standing political stability and economic prosperity in the country. And based on these realities on the ground, I think that the Turkish and Syrian decision makers will try to facilitate the returning of Syrian people to their country.
Mustafa, also today, the Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan has embarked on a 2-day trip to Russia. He's going to be meeting the Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, Russian President Vladimir Putin, and Vladimir Medinsky, who led the delegation in Istanbul when talks were held between Ukraine and Russia, and Turkey was involved as well, which led to the release of prisoners of war. So what can we expect from this meeting? There's definitely regional security, there's energy cooperation, and the war in Ukraine. But what do you think would be the most important part when Fidan holds discussions with the Russian leaders?
Omar, as you know, Russia launched its special military operation in Ukraine in February 2022. And since then, Turkey has been always calling for diplomacy and dialogue between Ukraine and Russia to end the conflicts in the Eastern Europe. Within this context, as you mentioned, Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan is paying an official visit to Russia today. He will meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin and his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov. He is also scheduled to hold talks with Russian delegations. I think that Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan will inform the Russian delegation about the latest peace talks between Ukraine and Russia in Istanbul. As you know, 2 weeks ago, Turkey's financial and cultural capital Istanbul hosted high-level talks between Ukraine and Russia, and U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio also represented the United States at these key peace negotiations. Since the very beginning of the crisis, Turkey has been always reiterating that there will be no losers in just peace, and there will be no winners at the war. Within this context, Turkey is always trying to mediate and facilitate talks between two warring sides in terms of putting an end to the conflicts. I think that today's meeting between Turkish and Russian delegations will yield positive results in terms of determining any possible ceasefire terms or peace deal between Ukraine and Russia.
Mustafa, let's talk about the war in Ukraine, right? Yesterday, Russia launched attacks on Kyiv and surrounding regions. And this was definitely one of the worst attacks, or the Ukrainian government has said that this was the biggest attack, one of the biggest attacks ever since the war began in 2022. So, Mustafa, what's the outlook of this war in Ukraine? Because we've seen peace negotiations, we've seen ceasefire talks, but none of that has materialized up until now. So, what do you think? Do you think there could be a change in the scenario when Fidan holds talks with his Russian counterparts and Russian leaders? What's going to happen? What's the outlook of this war?
Omar, amid the peace negotiations between Ukraine and Russia, Russian security forces are also taking steps to increase their military offensive in Ukraine. And as you mentioned, that over the weekend Russian security forces launched one of their strong military operations in Ukraine. And U.S. President Donald Trump is surprised by Russia's recent escalation in Ukraine. As you know, United States has been trying to accelerate its diplomatic efforts to find the peace between Ukraine and Russia. They held several meetings in Saudi Arabia and in Turkey to normalize their bilateral relationships. But Trump, as you know, also held a phone conversation with his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin. But yesterday, Trump said that I don't know what the hell happened to Putin, and he doesn't like Putin's recent stance on the Ukraine-Russia war. I think it will obstruct further talks between the United States and Russia to reach any ceasefire in the region. I think Turkey can play an important role between regional and international stakeholders because, as you know, Turkey's balanced approach to the Ukraine-Russia war are being praised by both the regional and international stakeholders. I think today Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan will try to reach a common way and common sense between the Western countries and Russia because, as you know, Turkey has been enjoying close relationships with both Western countries and Russia. I think Turkey's diplomatic actions and efforts will yield positive results in terms of reaching any ceasefire between Ukraine and Russia and achieving a long-standing peace and stability in the Eastern Europe.
You know, Trump has also criticized Ukrainian President Zelensky. He's saying that with the way he's talking, Ukraine is not going to achieve a lot of things because he has criticized Zelensky on a number of occasions. The last time we saw it was at the Oval Office, but then they had some meetings. One of them was at the Vatican. So definitely, Mustafa, definitely a tough time for both sides, Russia and Ukraine. Thanks for that analysis, Mustafa. Now let's take a look at this news report and we'll be right back.
Explosions were heard in Ukraine's capital Kyiv overnight as Russia launched the war's largest aerial attack across the country, hours before the two sides completed their third and final round of a major prisoner swap. Residents took shelter in an underground metro station in Kyiv during the assault, the second in 2 days. State emergency services released footage said to show the aftermath of the attacks in other areas, with homes seen on fire in Kyiv region's Makhalivka. According to Ukraine's Air Force, Russia had launched nearly 370 drones and missiles in its overnight assault. It said it was able to shoot down most of them. Children were among those killed, officials said. Mykolaiv in the south was among other regional centers also hit, as well as Ternopil in the west and Ukraine's second-largest city, Kharkiv. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky called for action from the United States, which has taken a softer line on Russia and its leader Vladimir Putin since President Donald Trump took office. The silence of America, the silence of others in the world only encourages Putin, Zelensky wrote on Telegram. Every such terrorist Russian strike is reason enough for new sanctions against Russia, he added. Later on Sunday, Russia and Ukraine confirmed they had swapped 303 prisoners each, completing the three-day exchange of a total of 1,000 prisoners each. Ukrainian authorities released video showing its citizens freed from Russian captivity eating chocolate for the first time in 3 years. Russia's defense ministry also published video showing soldiers on a bus celebrating their release. The exchange was the biggest since the war began 3 years ago. It was the only concrete step towards peace to emerge from the first direct talks between the two sides on May 16th, when they failed to agree on a ceasefire.
Welcome back to the program. Let's take a look at the front page of Daily Sabah. Mustafa, The first headline that I'm seeing here today is Turkey's efforts in the defense industry. Now, obviously, years of hard work here, and Turkey over the last few years, we've seen how it has turned into a defense hub, manufacturing its own equipment and, being more self-sufficient. Now, the Turkish technology minister has said that Turkey needs, this defense shift. It's extremely important, and this can help Europe. Tell us more about this, Mustafa.
Omar, as Daily Sabah's headlines indicates, Turkey is currently stepping up in Europe's defense shift, and changing geopolitical balances are opening a historic window of opportunity for Turkey to become a stronger, more effective and more decisive actor in the European defense ecosystem. As you know, 2 weeks ago, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan participated in the European Political Community Summit in Albania, and he reiterated Turkey's determination to strengthen its defense cooperation with the European countries. Within this context, Turkish decision makers have been always calling for more cooperation and unity among European countries, because geopolitical situation is currently shifting in the European political landscape. Within this context, I think Turkey will try to take new steps to enhance its bilateral relationships and multilateral relationships with the European countries. Turkish defense companies are also engaging high-level talks with their European counterparts to discuss what can be done in terms of increasing security situation in Eastern Europe. As you know, European Union is also trying to establish its own military structure, but Turkey always claims that European army shouldn't be separated from the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, because you know that Turkey is a member of NATO, but Turkey is not a member country within the European Union, and Turkey doesn't want to be excluded from the European security architecture. I think that Turkey will continue to take steps to increase its defense cooperation and collaboration with the European nations.
Mustafa, also at the bottom of the front page, there's Turkey, a key partner for the continent, marks Africa Day. Now, Africa Day is basically celebrating the foundation of the African Union. This was the 62nd anniversary of the African Union, and Turkey obviously holds an observer member status in the Union as well. Tell me more about Turkey and Africa ties, Mustafa. How have they been over the last few years?
Mara, as you know, Turkey has been enjoying close relationships with all countries in the Africa, and Turkish Foreign Minister also issued a written statement about Africa Day. As you also mentioned, that Turkey is one of the most important observer members within the African Union. Turkey has been always reiterating that there will be regional solutions for regional problems, and I think Turkey doesn't look at the African countries from the perspective of imperialism. Turkey has been always calling for a win-win situation with the African nations, and many African countries are praising Turkey's diplomatic efforts in terms of increasing international awareness about the challenges on the continent. I think that Turkey and Africa will continue to strengthen their bilateral relationships in all fields, ranging from politics and economy to trade and military. And Turkey's increasing geopolitical influence on the continent, I think, will help all countries in the region ensure long-standing peace and stability on the continent. I hope that Turkey will continue to strengthen and enhance its bilateral relationships with all countries in terms of ensuring peace and stability on the continent.
Mustafa, another headline that has always been at the top of our agenda, and also the Turkish government's agenda, has been the war in Gaza. What's the latest on the war in Gaza? Just this morning alone, some 30 people were killed in an airstrike, in an Israeli airstrike. So tell me more about this. What's the latest?
Umar, Israeli security forces are increasing their military offensive in the occupied Palestinian territory, Gaza Strip. And since October 7th, 2023, nearly 55,000 Palestinians, mostly women and children, have been murdered by the Israeli security forces. Israel is also blocking the entry of humanitarian aid to the Gaza Strip because there is, as you know, starvation crisis in Gaza right now, and the region is on the edge right now. But last week, Israeli security forces also launched a new ground operation in Gaza to take control of the Palestinian territory. Right now, international community is trying to increase pressure on Israel to convince the country to stop its military offensive there. Turkey has been always taking steps to increase international awareness about the ethnic cleansing policies conducted by Israel in the Gaza Strip. But right now, Israeli decision makers are turning a blind eye to warnings coming from the international community. I think that right now the United States is the only country in terms of convincing the Israeli decision makers to stop their military offensive in the region. But as you know, U.S. President Donald Trump is reiterating his country's strong support for Israel's so-called defensive actions in the region. I think that regional stakeholders in the Middle East, I mean Turkey, Iran, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and Syria, will be supposed to take concrete steps against Israel, because Israel is desiring to be only a regional hegemon in the region, and these countries are always accusing Israel of increasing geopolitical tensions in the region. I think that the Middle Eastern countries need unity and solidarity among them in terms of dealing with the security problems in the region.
Mustafa, thanks for that analysis. We'll, of course, continue to monitor all of these developments and more. The Pakistani Prime Minister was in Istanbul yesterday and he met Turkish President Erdoğan. Let's take a look at this news report and we'll be right back.
Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan met with Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif in Istanbul on Sunday, reaffirming the strong ties between the two nations. The meeting focused on enhancing bilateral cooperation and exchanging views on regional and global issues. Both leaders stressed the importance of increasing trade and investment, with Erdoğan reaffirming Turkey's goal to reach a trade volume of $5 billion with Pakistan. President Erdoğan emphasized deeper collaboration in energy, transportation, and defense, and called for enhanced coordination in counterterrorism efforts through intelligence sharing and technological support. The Turkish leader also highlighted the strategic potential of the Istanbul-Tehran-Islamabad railway and advocated for stronger educational partnerships. Erdoğan praised Pakistan's principled stance on the Palestinian issue and said Turkey is actively working to expedite humanitarian aid to Gaza. Following the talks, Prime Minister Sharif expressed gratitude for Turkey's unwavering support, particularly during Pakistan's recent tensions with India. In a post on X, he noted that the two leaders agreed to continue working closely to strengthen their long-standing partnership.
Welcome back to the program. Joining us now from the Pakistani capital is journalist and political analyst Javed Rana. Javed, welcome to the program. Javed, let's start by discussing the Pakistani Prime Minister's visit to Istanbul. He met Turkish President Erdoğan. The Pakistani Army Chief was also accompanying him. What's the latest, Javed? What was discussed more during this meeting?
I think in a broader context, Pakistan's Prime Minister and top officials have been touring the regional countries. And it wants to tell the world, more particularly with the focus to India, that Pakistan is a thanking to its regional partners. And that is in a broader context because of the fact that India is not only the war it has lost against Pakistan, it has also lost its public diplomacy, its so-called narrative on terrorism. I think Pakistan, in that broader context, is showcasing that, telling the India that it has partners, it has the friends in the region who supported its war against New Delhi. That is one part of it, and I think and also given the fact that there is a strong relationship between Turkey and Pakistan in terms of defense cooperation, in terms of the expansion of the trade, I think that is also we have to see it in that context. Pakistan and Turkey, they are basically aiming to enhance their trade from 1.5 billion US dollar to 5 billion US dollars in next couple of years. That is the one aim. But again, we have to see again the defense cooperation. That is far more important than those of the trade cooperation. And that is where both Pakistan and Turkey have been cooperating in manufacturing the warships, and also upgrading, particularly in case of Pakistan, Turkey has been helping out Pakistan in upgrading its fighter jets, the F-16, which Pakistan long ago had got from the USA. And that's just tip of the iceberg of the scale of the cooperation, because so far as the drone technology, where Turkey has made a lot of innovation, and that is where both countries are sharing their expertise. And also, you cannot ignore the role of the Turkey's drones in Pakistan's war against India. I think it was a kind of a battle between the drones manufactured by the Turkey and the drones manufactured by the apartheid cruel state of Israel. So Israeli drones were beaten up because Pakistan, I think 98% of those drones were shot down, and some of them by the common Pakistani peoples. They were firing at it. So I think that was for Pakistani people, it was a kind of entertainment when they were shooting down those Israeli drones. So again, this is going to be focus that how Pakistan and Turkey can further expand their ties. That is a broader context of the cooperation between two countries. But again, now since Pakistan has become a kind of a case for the world, where a country which was underestimated in terms of its conventional capability, it has beaten another country, a regional country, India, which perceives itself as one of the biggest so-called military power and economic power. And then there was a new use of technology, like we have been hearing about dogfights between fighter jets. Now the very concept of the dogfight has been changed, and it has been tested in air battles between India and Pakistan. Pakistani fighter jets were shooting down Indian fighter jets by staying within its own territorial territory. And that is something new happening in terms of the jamming signals of the other fighter jets, but through cyber attacks. I mean, this is a completely new usage of the technology, and therefore Pakistan's fighter jets, Pakistan's pilots now have become a case study for the world. How come they jam a far advanced fighter jets known as Rifles, and by staying in its own in its own territory, and Pakistan has established its aerial superiority. So again, after World War II, this was the biggest dogfight. But again, the concept of the dogfight has changed, where a country is keeping its planes in its own air and shooting down its rivals' planes in its own territory. And that is why India had to abandon its air bases from its of the neighboring region up to 400 kilometers, and that is something new which was happening. And certainly the cooperation of the China is extremely important in this particular case.
Javed, we're talking about bilateral ties, right? We're talking about trade. We're talking about strengthening those ties, those historic ties between Pakistan and Turkey. So before those military strikes happened, or, some people call it war, some people call it operational strikes between India and Pakistan. So before that happened, Turkey and India had great ties. They still do. But the sentiment, the anti-Turkey sentiment, has grown in India. So what are you thinking? What's your analysis of the sentiment that is in New Delhi right now? How is New Delhi looking at this latest visit from the Pakistani Prime Minister?
I think, again, New Delhi would not be happy over the visit of the Pakistani Prime Minister. And New Delhi, now, all the vibes that coming from the New Delhi suggest that their tourists are not going to visit Turkey. Their tourists not going to visit Azerbaijan, because these are the countries which provided all kind of weaponry support and all kind of whatever they could have done. They did it behind the scene. This is not going to work. I think the common people in India now understanding the tactics of a RSS government, extremist, fanatical government, just were not very different to the apartheid state government. Those tactics are not working. Not all over the world, its approach towards terrorism is not working, because the people in the world are not taking that Pakistan is conducting terrorism in Kashmir, because they see in a different context. Kashmir is an internationally disputed territory where there are numerous UN Security Council resolutions under which there has to be plebiscite, which India has been refusing, and calling it, whenever there is some resistance, sometime unfortunately civilians are killed, then it calls it a terrorism. And also in a broader context, we have to see that the West is losing interest in this so-called terrorism narrative, because it has gone out of Afghanistan, where it was beaten up, and in a similar fashion, the bigger theater in the Middle East of USA against so-called ISIS, that has also been winded down. Turkey's the campaign against PKK terrorists has been also winded down, and I think that is also an indicator that the world is not interested in a fake terrorism narrative, and also particularly at a time when the apartheid state has misused this so-called narrative of terrorism against Hamas. It has killed 60,000 people and maimed and injured over 120,000 people in the occupied Gaza. So people are not taking it very seriously. I think now even Indian officials are their parliamentarians are visiting the United States and the other Western countries, telling them that there is a threat of terrorism. So I think in that context, the very question that you asked, the world is going to look at a broader perspective, and the people inside India, they are not very happy with their own government, because they have been beaten up in the war. I'm using the word of the war because it has a context, and there is a difference of opinion given the fact that it was a very short, but the scale of which the risk involved in it was a huge. I think at a scale at which Pakistan destroyed India's military infrastructure, that was more than what happened in 1971's war. So many people in Pakistan, I think, prefer to use the term of a war instead of using the terminology of a brief confrontation or some kind of a border tension.
Javed, the two leaders, they also discussed Gaza and the current humanitarian situation that is in Gaza right now. 2.3 million people without access to basic aid, basic needs. And then Netanyahu has just said that Israel is going to control over 75% of the occupied Gaza Strip. So how are you looking at the latest situation? And we also saw last week that Israel struck a house where 7 children from the same family were killed. 7 or 9, I believe it's 9 children. 9 children were killed from the same family. So how are you looking at this? Journalists have also been killed now. More than 220 journalists have been killed. Israel's not stopping with the bombing. How are you looking at the situation?
Well, Israeli military from ground, from air, they are bombing, killing people inside apartheid Israel. And I think the bigger issue along with this is also the people are being starved to death. And you may recall that just recently, the so-called head of the NGO, who was backed by Israel and the USA, to drop a very limited aid, which is maybe a little more than 100 trucks, because Israel was not trusting the UN, the independent body, because it thought it was a compromising and providing the food aid to also to Hamas. I think even the head of that NGO has resigned over the discrimination, over the very limited scale of this aid being distributed to the people, and then more importantly, then there is also selection where this distribution can take place and where it cannot. So I think he was not willing to work with Israel. Their own men were not willing to work with Israel at a time when the West is now begins to deserting Israel. So I think we have to see that now the tragedy of the Palestinian seems to become a kind of a liability for the Western aid agencies, the United Nations, obviously, because United Nations itself has been the victim of the very negative propaganda, and that in that context, what is not happening is that no one is willing to do anything meaningful which can deter Israel, which can stop Israel's aggression in occupied Gaza. That is not happening. My understanding is, I've been saying it for the last 1.5 years, unless there is a genuine military deterrence, Israel would not stop this aggression, or if the Americans, they change their policy, none of which is happening. So therefore, we will continue to see this genocide in days and weeks and months to come if these two conditions are not fulfilled.
Javed, if I may add to what you said, now Israel has a new plan. It's saying that we'll have mercenary groups who will distribute aid in cooperation with the United States, because they've been saying whatever aid that's been dropped into Gaza, Hamas has been stealing that aid. But it's not Hamas. There are other armed groups inside Gaza who have been stealing that aid. So what do you think about this plan? Even the United Nations has rejected this plan, right? Because it says this is another way of Israel administering the humanitarian aid. So what do you think about this new plan that Israel has proposed?
I think we have to see what Israeli officials and their top political leaders have been saying. They've been saying it that the aid is being used as a weapons of war, basically forcing people to turn against Hamas and other jihadi groups. That is a part of it, forcing people to expel themselves from Gaza. Leave Gaza. They have set up their desk to facilitate people to leave Gaza. That is a broader context. That is not working. Nonetheless, it is not working. I think now all these kind of the narratives, fake narrative that apartheid state has been coming up with is not working. It's not working. Everybody knows that they are deliberately killing people. They are slitting their heads. People Israel through bombs. They've been splitting the bodies of the babies. It's a child-killing apartheid state. The scale of the Israel's terrorism, the scale of the genocide is, I would say, unprecedented in the modern history. We have not seen it after the Holocaust of the Jews in Germany. Now, same thing. I mean, Jews were the victims of the genocide and the Holocaust of the Hitler. Now, again, the people from among the Jews, known as Zionists, now they are replicating the same thing in Gaza. The question is why the West and world is so particular about Holocaust. Why there have been laws that no one can even question the statistics and the credibility of the Holocaust figures. Why can't there be a legislation against another Holocaust unless this culture of impunity is not eliminated from the world? I don't think there would be any peace. There has to be war, one after the other. Look at the broader picture. After Afghanistan, they have gone to the Ukraine, and then when Ukraine war theater was there, they have started off this Gaza, and then Pakistan and India. Again, you have to see these big powers. They have to sell their weapons, and the people, more particularly Muslims all over the world, they are the victims of those weapons.
Javed Rana, thank you for joining us from Islamabad. It was a pleasure having you. Anews editor Mustafa Kocakınar, thank you for being on the program as well.
You are welcome.
That brings us to the end of our program. Thanks for joining us. Bye for now.